Deep dive, deep dive, deep dive. Hey everybody, NikoTheLegend here, also known as the well-mannered teenager, the snowflake, and the rambling idiot. And boy, we got a bit of a big one today. Although I don't think it's going to be as long as I'm making it, but it's something big in terms of understanding what the Mass Effect Legendary Edition is all about. And why am I doing such a video? Because I believe that this game deserves a deep dive indeed, because there's a lot of people out there that are probably still contemplating, still wondering, or maybe not, and just going to buy it anyway, of course. But many questions still linger in people's minds if this remastered Legendary Edition has the bells and whistles to compel us to buy the game or relive it again, or just maybe you're already buying it, but you still want to know a bit more about it. You know, you still have those gray areas, those transparency issues. So I, NikoTheLegend, would like to help out with that by reading this article, which goes a pretty good in-depth analysis within the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. And I was kind of surprised from what I read, because I was like kind of not expecting a lot of this. And now that we've seen Mass Effect Legendary Edition in the flesh now, and it shows us what it's going to be about for the most part, it gets us pretty excited, and it lets us know if this thing is up to snuff or not. So what I'm going to do here is read this article to you guys word for word, and then once this is done, then we'll talk a little bit about it, and then that'll be it. And then, yeah, like I said, I want you guys to know in and out what this thing is all about for sure. There's much to discuss and much to learn, definitely. So without further ado, folks, this is the deep dive, or maybe kind of deep dive, of the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Mass Effect returns. BioWare talks trilogy tweaks and franchise revival. Legendary Edition due May, extensive Mass Effect 1 work revealed. Article by Tom Phillips, news editor for Eurogamer. Mass Effect's back. The Legendary Edition of BioWare's beloved trilogy launches on 14th May, and Shepard's aging space adventures have never looked better. We have plenty of detail on all the upgrades this remaster brings to Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 below. But of course, there's more to this impending revival than all that. Sitting down with BioWare to discuss the changes and look to the future, the fact Mass Effect is back on the schedule at all seems like something worth celebrating, considering where the franchise seemed to have been left a few years ago. For fans, there's been an anxious wait for news on whether Mass Effect would continue until the twin announcements late last year of the remastered trilogy and a brand new, still very far off continuation of the series let fans once again breathe easy. We talked to BioWare about all that below as well. First, some specifics. The Mass Effect Trilogy's Legendary Edition includes 4K support and HDR compatibility, plus 60 FPS on PC and consoles from PS4 Pro / Xbox One Series X forwards. On PC, it has support for controllers and a 21:9 widescreen displays. As expected, all 3 games and all single-player DLCs are included. There's no multiplayer mode, no additional story elements, and no version yet for Nintendo Switch. Mass Effect 1, by far the most dated looking of the trilogy, has undergone a particularly extensive rework, with dramatic improvements to some of its environments. The results on planets such as Eden Prime, Ilos, and Pharaohs look on first impression far closer to a full remake. Mass Effect 1 has also seen other tweaks, including fan-requested improvements to the Mako's vehicles' often wildly erratic driving experience, various combat changes, and much faster Citadel lifts, thank goodness. Differences across the whole trilogy include remastered character models, an expanded universal character creator, and the option to use Mass Effect 3's default female Shepard model throughout. There are noticeable improvements to Shepard's range of available skin tones, hairstyles, and makeup options for a more diverse range of possibilities. Overall, BioWare says there are tens of thousands of updated textures, shaders, visual effects, and lighting changes, plus a new bokeh-style depth of field. Work on the Legendary Edition began in early 2019, when a small team within BioWare finally got the green light. There have been tentative talks within the studio for half a decade to get a trilogy remaster off the ground, some of which got further than others. But it was the return of the studio boss Casey Hudson, a Mass Effect veteran who finally pushed the project into being. I was probably in half a dozen meetings, over probably almost as many years asking, are we gonna do it? How about now? Recalls Mac Walters, Mass Effect's longtime writer, producer, and now project director of the Legendary Edition. If anything, I would say having Casey Hudson back in the studio at the time, he was obviously very passionate about the trilogy for obvious reasons, and he was very supportive of it. I think that really helped get over that initial inertia where you just need to kind of get something moving and then you're doing it. and it just seemed to click this time, and away we went. Where to start with such an enormous project? BioWare quickly decided against creating new content or adding anything back and previously left on the cutting floor in order to preserve the experience people remember. The studio also discussed with Epic Games the possibility of moving the entire trilogy onto Unreal Engine 4, though discarded that idea after realizing many of the game's systems would no longer be compatible. Walters compared the project's early months of work to starting restoration on a classic car, then discovering that car was buried in cement, and every time you tried to dig it out, you were worried about dinging the paint or ripping off a mirror. By the spring of 2020, work on the Legendary Edition was at a baseline state where everything worked and BioWare's first round of improvements were in. Mass Effect's famous cast of characters have been a particular focus, with improvements to models, eye shaders, and lighting, along new visual techniques such as tone mapping, ambient occlusion, and subsurface scattering. The team has spent time discussing the need to keep improvements to character designs consistent across the trilogy, though also reflect the changes each character goes through. A look at an updated model for Mass Effect 1's Liara, for example, shows her doe-eyedness tuned down a notch, a change which better reflects the direction of her character arc and model across the 3 games. The Legendary Edition was also now content complete, with a new single launcher to wrap all 3 games in one, plus all respective DLCs and other items unlocked. It's worth taking a moment to note the list of included additions here is nothing less than the full single-player package, from simple mission packs to full-blown expansions like Lair of the Shadow Broker, from individual promotional weapons to squad-mate costume packs and collector's edition bonuses. If it's relevant at all to the trilogy single-player, it's included. Even the catch-up Genesis comics are there. Gameplay changes to Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 sound relatively minimal, though there's a whole list of differences to remove friction from Mass Effect 1. Aim Assist adds adhesion to keep you locked onto enemies, while a zoom map will flick your focus onto a target when aiming. Each Mass Effect 1 gun has been balanced and given an individual feel similar to those found in later games. The Mako has been given a speed boost and updated physics, while the game's hidden loading screens and lifts have been drastically cut down in length. Comparison footage of a ride-up to the Citadel's Presidium level lasts just 14 seconds in the Legendary Edition, down from 52 seconds in the original. But even with the baseline changes across the trilogy, it seems clear Mass Effect 1 still lagged behind the visuals of the other 2 games. Did its level need a full remake instead, in order to live up to the rest of the trilogy, or is there a middle ground to be found? We didn't want to throw them out and start new, environment and character director Kevin Meek explained, recalling how for him, the layout of the original areas was just an integral part of the experience when first playing the game, before he joined BioWare more recently to work on Anthem. So the team called in Derek Watts, art director on the original Mass Effect, to paint over images of Mass Effect 1 as they stood with new details and effects, then went about creating those. Eden Prime, for example, now has lighting to show off its fuller skybox and up-pressed textures, along with extra effects like smoke, ground fog, burning ashes, and scattered debris. A list of other Mass Effect 1 improvements mentions enemy and squad AI changes, the removal of class-based weapon restrictions, an XP rebalance so you can hit the game's cap without New Game Plus, more consistent autosave points, boss encounter improvements, reduced cooldown for first aid, a reduction in minigames, and a modernized HUD. Opening up editors and looking at the content the way it was, I realized just how impressive, certainly when you look at Mass Effect 1, what we were able to achieve there. Walters recalls, when I asked him what it's like to be back working on the franchise again after a bumpy few years. I remember how innovative and kind of scrappy we were. This feels it's kind of got that indie vibe to it, that we're sort of scrappy and we're going to make this work. Everyone's wearing different hats, and we're solving problems all the time. It reminds me of the development back then. When I was on Jade Empire in Mass Effect 1, we often did that. I was a writer, but I was working with the music team, the cinematic team. We often sort of dipped our toes in multiple things. I loved that and getting into problem solving, and that's what this felt like again. I was excited about doing it. I wasn't necessarily excited about being brought face to face with the content that I made back in the day, because all you see are the flaws, but overall it's actually been way more positive than any negative. On Switch, Walters doesn't rule out Legendary Edition for Nintendo's console down the road, perhaps when it has more powerful hardware to help show off the trilogy's new visuals, but said the remaster project got off the ground on PC and existing consoles, and it was BioWare's mission to get these working first. Personally, I love it, he said, but ultimately I think we had a path set and it was like, let's finish that and then let's see sort of where we were at. The next new Mass Effect game is still a long way off, further away from Dragon Age 4, which itself isn't coming before 2022, but with the trilogy's Legendary Edition on the horizon and the franchise's future seemingly assured once again, I want to know how it felt to have the series back on solid footing after years in the wilderness. Did Walters ever think Mass Effect might have just run its course? I try and I go to a lot of conventions when I can, he says in response. And if there's one thing I know, it's this. There's a passion for this franchise to continue both within the studio and with our fans. I never had any doubt that the franchise would continue to live on in some form or fashion. I'm pretty excited. The momentum of the IP is not something that's just going to stop, Meek adds. BioWare has these large IPs, fairly well-known brands, but sometimes I think people think we're bigger than we maybe are. And if we have a handful of projects on the go and we need the team to jump on one project, maybe one of the IPs sits idle for a year or two. But as developers, that time just flies by because you're busy working on something and then you've had that little bit of a breakaway from it. You get to come back and obviously have some fresher eyes, and you're not burnt out from whatever the last project might have been. Those are the types of things I think people should be kind of expecting every once in a while, right? And it's not the end of the world. So, what about the future of the Mass Effect, I ask? Will there be hints to it in the Legendary Edition? Even just the odd note left lying around pointless to a future plotline? No, is the short answer. I think it's easier for the future of the franchise to look back and take from that, Walter concludes, than for us to try to set a course for something that needs time to ideate and flourish on its own. Well, there you have it, folks. That was the in-depth analysis of Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Now, there is a high chance that maybe all of your questions weren't answered. Maybe there's still some gray areas left over. But I think we kind of eliminated a little bit of the transparency issues that that maybe some of us consumers were having, or just curious folk. But when I was reading this for the first time, there was a lot of interesting tidbits of information there for sure. And I was like, this is pretty sweet. I like hearing this, and I like knowing what type of product I'm going to get my hands on. Now, this article alone won't completely justify everything that goes into the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, but it does still do a good job nonetheless. So, for that in mind, or with that in mind, I suggest going to the BioWare website, checking out their Twitter or BioWare.com. They look up videos on YouTube and stuff like that for comparison. All that will be there because nowadays we're able to see it to believe it. Finally, they showed us what this is all about. I know they've been working real hard on this, and it's pretty interesting to see this stuff. And we get some good comments about the Legendary Edition, got some bad, and then some mixed bag. But that's okay, as long as us consumers or just gamers know, bit by bit what we're getting ourselves into. That's all that matters. So this has been fun to do, and guys, anything you want to talk about with this article in mind or the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, let me know down in the comments below. How are you feeling about this game now that Nico the Legend has read this to you, given you a bit of a, get into the nitty-gritty on it, on this big project? Like I said before, I think it's pretty cool to know a little bit more about this and knowing what I'm getting my hands on. But that's going to be it, Pathfinders. I hope you did enjoy this video. I've been your host, Nico the Legend, also known as the Well-Mannered Teenager, the Snowflake, and the Rambling Idiot. And now this is coming out in May. We have a little time left to see a little bit more, and we definitely will. And, in the end, we just want this thing to work out, to succeed. Take care, guys.